Welcome to the Beer Ladies podcast with your hosts, Lisa, Katie, Christina, and myself, Thandi. You can find us at our website or all over social media. Our website is beerladiespodcast.com, and our social media, Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, Blue Sky, TikTok, and even Facebook are at Beer Ladies Pod or Beer Ladies Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, you can find our merch store link on any of our social media bios or in the show notes for this episode. And if you'd like to sponsor an episode, do mail us at beerladiespodcast@gmail.com. Now back to the beer. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Beer Ladies podcast. My name is Thandi, and I'm joined today by Lisa and Christina. Hello, friends. Nice to see you. Nice to hear you. Nice to all of the things. And we are in your ears this week, back after a week of a bit of hecticness. You know, we sometimes life gets in the way, and we just couldn't get a podcast out last week. So be it. So anyway, here we are, and we've got a topic today that, I feel like a lot of people talk about, but within their social circles, sometimes privately, sometimes everyone's sense checking with each other. And I know we do, we often talk about this kind of thing in our private chats. And that is, how much does the ethos of a brewery matter? Should it matter? How much onus is it on the consumer to figure the ethos out and to make decisions based on it? So, there's a lot to cover. We had recently in the news there, James Watt from Brewdog stepping down after 17 years, and we will definitely touch on that. But we've got other examples, and we've got, other talking points about whether things are funny or not, or whether things should be allowed to appeal to only niche audiences. So we're gonna go through it all. But first things first, drinks break. What are we drinking? Christina, are you drinking tonight, friend? No?
I had a smoothie earlier, but not anymore.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Lisa, what you got?
So I have I'm the middle ground. I have the hop off. I'm still on the non-alcoholics for the most part, although the odd lower key thing here and there, but I'm sticking with school night. We're being responsible, so on the non-alcoholics, on non-alcoholic IPA, and with a local brand we love. So
very good. Well, as usual, I'm go big or go home. So today we have got Chimay, the Brune.
Ooh.
And in glassware, can we just be impressed for a second? Although I did clean my glass before, but it didn't come out beer clean because who's got the time? And so my head has disappeared really quickly. But anyway, It is a beautiful beer, and I promise you it does pour with a beautiful frothy head, but it's just not visible anymore. But it is a lovely, like rich kind of amber copper brown color, slightly hazy, and it's got all of the good sort of Trappist trappings that one would expect from Chimay.
Ah, delightful.
Aye. Okay, so friends, we actually, to let you all at home in behind the curtain a bit, when we were recording about local ingredients and how seasons affected beer production, we got into a whole tangent off camera, or at least off the recording.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish we had recorded it, because we could have just had a whole other podcast in it. But we got on a whole tangent about the kind of the ethos of different breweries, and it came from, in that case, we were talking about ingredients and seasonality and being clever with marketing and punting local and appealing to people around you. But sometimes that can go a little far, right? Or sometimes it's a bit hit and miss. So I've got an example from America, which, discussion point, brewery in America, and I don't actually know how long ago this was, although I will just double check before I claim anything. This was December 2023, so not too long ago. A brewery wanted to set up shop in Virginia. They are called Armed Forces Brewing Company. Have you guys heard of them?
I do remember this story kicking around, so I didn't get into the details, but bits and pieces.
So basically armed forces, and it's like military themed brewery, targeting vets and people, let's say, sympathetic to the military and all of that. And the community where they wanted to set up said, absolutely not. so they vetoed it. Now, there I think are some processes. I don't know if the resolution has been final, but they were vetoed. They were not allowed. And one of the reasons for this was that the community, large parts of the community, you can never say it's all, but large parts just didn't want to see something like a brewery, which in theory is meant to bring people together, be a community hub, just like a lot of other places. They didn't want to see it themed in such a way that glorifies violence, and I'm using air quotes here, threatens LGBTQIA plus people, or there's also that kind of opinion that the military actually doesn't love America, not actually as patriotic as what it sort of seems to be. So, one of those, and this is not about the military, this is about,
Right.
it's a divisive issue, but is there room for it, within a brewery?
Yeah, and I think if I remember that one correctly, and I may be wrong here, so I'm going to caveat it with that. If I remember that one correctly too, then it turned out that it was all kind of window dressing as well. Like there wasn't actually, like they weren't actually hiring veterans. Or again, I may be getting it partially right or wrong in broad strokes, but it seemed like it was there was a certain there was definitely sort of a lack of genuine something in it, and so I think that also kind of underpins it again, even if you sort of take the military part out of the equation and what that might or might not have meant. It's like, was it all fake? Is it like being a fake geek girl? Like all of these things, like how much of this is like, what is the authenticity to this kind of thing when so much of at least modern craft brew is built around authenticity, which I'm air quoting for people at home as a vibe often more than a real thing. Now that said, there are plenty of places that do, I think, really lean into it and do it well. But I think that was one of the things people objected to with this too, was that not only did it have something that was kind of potentially divisive as a starting point, but that they didn't even kind of mean it. It was all sort of window dressing, if you like. And I think there's a lot there where I think people are kind of interrogating what opens in their own neighborhood, certainly, but then also like more broadly, it got this kind of publicity because then people started to dig into some of this, and it just sort of snowballed, I think. So
I'm glad you could add more onto the story, because I didn't know that
which
about.
I may be misremembering in parts, but yeah.
Well, we can always be corrected, but that is a really interesting point, and it brings us right down to, our headline of the last couple of weeks, which is Brewdog's James Watt resigning after 17 years, and this is one of those. This is one of those breweries that I think people fell in love with really early and fell really strongly in love with this brand, because it was all about, kind of anti big beer, anti the man, punk, and to the point that it was, even punk for equities, equity for punks. What?
Equity punks,
I can't speak. But the whole point was that it was kind of an anti-establishment beer, really punk, and people could own it. You could be the owner or a part owner of Brewdog, which was so very appealing. At that time, granted, it's nearly 20 years ago already that the brewery started up. So what happened? What changed? Like, why are we here now?
It's a great question. And I think again, like that particular one is such a roller coaster of, sort of, all of the things. And I think it's probably worth starting off, like if we put it in kind of the broader context of, let's say, craft beer 20 years ago, a lot of those breweries that opened up at that point are because people could get funding from friends and family, like, so you're already working with kind of people who might have deeper pockets than some. That doesn't mean they're all necessarily wealthy, but they have access to capital to go off and do these things. Now, obviously, with Brewdog, you're looking at even more than kind of, let's say, people opening up a small brewery. Like you're talking about getting serious access to capital to go off and do this, which is, is that very punk rock? Not really, but here we are. So I think it started off on, kind of feeling kind of false, if you like, again, that idea of authenticity. But then I think the missteps since then are what's, what make people angry now. It certainly, make me angry now as a consumer who doesn't want to go to a Brewdog because of all of the things they've kind of leaned into and doubled down on. Doubled down. Ooh, I'm on the non-alcoholic beer, folks. Just saying. But and again, I think it's important to say, there are people who work for all these things who didn't choose their bosses. This is, we've all worked for places where we might disagree with what's going on at management, and people in an individual place can be fantastic. But, at the same time, you're like, when kind of a lot of the dirty laundry, do you want to go support a place? And I think it depends on what happens when that dirty laundry starts getting aired. Does it get resolved? Does it, or does the pattern of behavior continue? So
Yeah, yeah. It was one of those things with Brewdog where, they were always kind of pushing boundaries. From releasing the beers that were in those taxidermied squirrels. I mean, that was just disgusting. But, they also tried a political stance where they were, brewing a beer with Putin, Vladimir Putin on it. Then they offended the transgender community. So they've kind of always pushed boundaries. But I think that what probably did it for most people was the treatment of staff. So there was
yeah.
the big call out. The big call out in 2021. It was almost a bit of a COVID baby, wasn't it? This thing where people started speaking out against various breweries. This is not just Brewdog.
Yeah,
Against
absolutely.
various breweries. But Brewdog were one of the ones that were hit the hardest with accusations of being treated as if you're a woman working there, being treated as an object, poor mental health support, poor overtime pay, lots of things. So the staff disgruntlement was a really big thing.
Yeah.
And then it also came out that they'd sold off a part of Brewdog to Heineken, which I think if you weren't already kind of, you know, if your limits hadn't been pushed by the time all of this happened, that revelation came out, and I think a lot of people just thought, well, that's the nail in the coffin, isn't it? The final nail, because how on earth can you be like a punk brand?
Yeah. And yet they've managed to, without us listing all of the other things since then, they've still managed to kind of carry on
Yes,
in a
yes,
not positive way. And again, like, we don't want Brewdog to sue us. We're not naming, individual people or calling them that, but we're just saying the vibe now is not great. I feel like the
no,
associations are very negative at this point. Like, certainly my first thought is not the beer. And again, maybe that's something we circle back to too, is like, what does the beer taste like? Is it the first thing we think about it, or is it some kind of image that's the first thing we think about? So,
yeah,
there's something there. And I think that's, again, for good or bad, like, are there places where I'm like, oh, that seems really cool, but maybe the beer's not great too? Like, I don't know. It could absolutely cut both ways. So
Well, and my thing with this, just in a general point, is that we're all sort of, we're in beer a lot. So we hear a lot of the stories where,
yeah,
we our hobby is beer. This is something that we do. The average person isn't hearing all of the stories that we
exactly.
hear. And even I'm not hearing all the stories that you hear. I had no idea about the story that Tandy, introduced the show with. I had heard nothing about that. I'm probably not on social media as much as I used to be at all.
Right.
Um, by choice. So I'm just not as connected to these stories. And if I'm not, connected to these stories, your average consumer is probably not connected to these stories either. So I think we have to be careful with how much pressure we're putting on the average consumer to
Totally.
realistically know this information, or
Yeah.
even know where to access this information. Like, a lot of people aren't even thinking about, like, it's like, when I go to the shop and I buy cereal, I don't think about what brand cereal it is. I think, I'm in Aldi, that one looks good,
Right.
right? Or Little, or wherever I am. And
hmm
I think that's probably how a lot of people pick beer, and sometimes
yeah,
it's how
yeah,
I pick beer, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. Often is, I'm at a bar and, oh, that looks interesting. I don't necessarily Google everything about the brewery. Maybe I should. I'm not sure that I should have to, though.
Right. I
Um,
know.
yeah,
And we always
yeah,
come back to this, don't we? Like, it shouldn't be on the consumer to have to be like, did you do a bad thing before I, try to buy from you? Now, that doesn't mean we don't want to be mindful about things, but it shouldn't have to be this much of the brain space, if you like. you know.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And it's like,
agreed.
again, how are we accessing that information? Do you even know where to look for it? I mean, like the Google search engine is what it is. Like it might not even come up. Like there's lots of stories out there. How do we even vet the ones that are true versus
Right.
not true? Just because someone said something on the internet doesn't make it a fact.
Definitely.
So who are trusted sources on this that have verifiable information? It and how do we get that into the mainstream? Like, of course, like you're talking about BrewDog, like that stuff is well out there, but still, there's definitely going to be lots of people who have not read that, you know,
Yeah.
and who never will. Um,
Plenty. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And I think,
yeah.
oh yeah, go ahead, Sandy. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just gonna say there's also a lot of people that might have heard whispers of things,
Yeah.
oh, there's a little controversy, but then they just don't care because all they care about is that they like that beer, the way it tastes, the price, whatever they like about it, and that's the decision that they're making. And to be honest, fair play. Like,
Right.
what are you going to say to that? Because as you say, Christina, it cannot be everyone's second job to make sure that companies are good or that
Right.
they've not been in the news recently or that they're treating staff correctly and paying livable wages. That's actually not on the consumer, or it shouldn't be, I think.
and
Yeah.
we can make decisions based on, people can boycott brands and do things, and I think that's wonderful, right? But
Sure.
the average person isn't going to be in a position to be able to do that. And for a lot of people, that's a position, it's quite privileged to be able to have the time and energy to research all these things. Your average person is like, oh my god, it's Friday, I just want to pick up some beer. They don't have 5 hours to do research on all
Right.
of the brands that are in the brewery or in the off license, and that's an unrealistic expectation to have of consumers. We should do our best to consume ethically if we can, but not all of us can. Not all of us have the finances or the time to access those kinds of things. And so I think we need to be cognizant of our expectations of your everyday person as well, and not be unrealistic.
Mm,
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, like you never want to shame anyone for picking up a, bad air quote, brand because again, there could be a lot of reasons they're picking that up. One, starting off with just like you said, they just don't know or they haven't heard the chat or, there's plenty of reasons not to be, terminally plugged into all of that. And again, I think especially since Twitter has gone the way it's gone, like I know I miss a ton of things now because I'm just not seeing some of that. And I know, if I'm traveling somewhere, especially like I feel like you can be hyper focused on your local scene and I don't think that's a bad thing by any means to just be aware of, what's going on around you. But I think, if I'm traveling, I'm not gonna sort of vet everything before I try it. I'm just gonna be like, oh, I haven't had that, I'll give that a try. And or this is something I always enjoy when I'm in X or Y place. Like most of the time, I shouldn't have to think, oh, but did they in the year since I've been here, has X or Y happened? It shouldn't be top of mind. It should just be like, oh, does it still taste good? Does it still, have they been keeping it well? All of those things. But like I was thinking about how Katie, hello Katie, and I were at the beer festival in Copenhagen not too long ago, and to try to go to an event of that size and try to only go to again air quoting good or virtuous or whatever places, like you don't know, like there's no way you could have the time and energy to look at that kind of thing in advance. And again, you would hope there's some selection process that's doing that for you to a certain extent. There is some vetting to make sure that the quality is good, and again that there's no obvious glaring lawsuit or something hanging over someone. But it's a lot to try to be mindful of. So
mm.
I don't know, I feel like it's
yeah,
again, I come back to, you can kind of watch your local scene, but there's so much else
yeah.
out there.
And there's definitely breweries that I've heard about, obviously we're in Ireland, from like the US or other places that I
Yeah.
won't drink from because I've heard the stories. They've,
Yeah.
made headlines. They're pretty big and apparent, and, just not something that I would want to financially support. But yeah, I mean, I do the when I know something that, just does not mesh with who I am, and it's a continued pattern of behavior, then I'm out.
Yeah.
That's for me. But I don't, like I said, I don't have access to all of these stories. I don't know everything that's going on. I do the best that I can do with the information that I have. And if I find out later, oh, hey, that's a brewery that I don't really maybe want to support right now, or maybe never again, or whatever, then at that time when I have the new information, I'll make that decision. But yeah, I think sometimes we have to be careful with what we're expecting people who aren't even, like us in podcasting land, who probably aren't seeing any of these stories,
No.
or would even know that the
Yeah.
stories would exist to see them. Like,
No.
It's also interesting because I think this is one of those questions which is a little bit like it's as old as time. Do you separate the artist from the art a little bit? So because you can't expect for people to try and keep up with every option in front of them and the history of that brewery, and if it were the case that we could not separate artist from artistry, we wouldn't have Kellogg's, we wouldn't have Nestle, we wouldn't have Disney. Like
Sure.
there's a bunch of brands that we just wouldn't support. But sometimes there is enough momentum, or there is enough anger or outrage to actually make a financial dent in the company. So we have an example from good old 2023, was it? Where, give me a second, because I just don't want to get it wrong. Yes. So 2023, when Bud Light was boycotted. Do you guys remember this in the news?
This was so complicated and weird. It was
this is
such a
yeah.
strange.
It
Yeah.
was. Now, I
And I
can't
think it's
actually
still
remember
happening.
what this can design was about, but I think it was something more inclusive, potentially featuring a transgender person.
I think the they that decided to freak out, like, collectively lost their minds because a trans person was drinking their beer. Ah,
Yes, that's what
yeah.
it was. It was an advert with a trans person drinking the beer, and the head of marketing at the time said, uh, she wanted to make the brand a bit more inclusive and get out of the kind of fratty, frat boy humor that the brand had been associated with for a long time. Now, I'm not saying that that's true or not, but it was interesting because there was such uproar on TikTok and YouTube and Twitter and all the places where people were like, it was actually kind of funny because they were buying it just to destroy it on camera.
Right.
Like, to be
Makes
fair,
sense.
you've bought it, so are you really making a dent? But there was a boycott in terms of non-sales as well. So it wasn't just the people doing it for the for the fanfare of it. And I wonder actually how much that did affect the numbers, if it did, because my other lurking suspicion, which is a little sad, but my other lurking suspicion is that even if we decide to boycott with our wallets, it doesn't make that big of a difference.
Probably
Possibly.
not.
Maybe it
Well,
depends on the
yeah,
brand.
I think it depends on the brand, and I think it depends on like how the pattern and how
Mm,
egregious the situation is, and how many people, how broad the situation appeals to people, like how many people can relate to the situation, or how many people are allies in the situation that are like, you know what, actually I'm not okay with this, so I'm not going to buy that beer. Because the problem is, a lot of times with breweries who behave in a way, or companies who behave in a way that I'm not going to support them anyway. I'm not their target audience. So me not shopping with them is nothing. They don't care.
Right.
yeah.
Um, so you have to also be their target audience. So I think it really depends, doesn't it?
No, I think you're
Yeah.
right. And it kind of comes full circle in a way because if you decide that a brewery or a brand doesn't fit with your own personal values or your ethos, you leaving them is probably not going to make a difference. When hundreds of thousands or millions of people leave a big
Mm-hmm.
brand, it can make a difference because I've just read there that apparently there was an 11% drop in sales in one of the weeks and 21% drop in sales in another one of the weeks. So that is actually quite big. Fair. Now, it doesn't mean that they should go back and be kind of, air quoted again, frat boy humor again.
Right.
It just means that they learned something about their target audience. And whether they can win them back is a whole nother thing.
Well, yeah, and I think, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's an interesting one too, because then it goes back to the idea of, well, what's in the can or bottle? Because just because they, start off with a campaign where I'm like, oh, that's nice of them to include a trans person. That's, forward thinking of them. But I'm still not going to go out and buy a Bud Light because it's disgusting. So
Yeah.
it's like that's the, I'm like, I'm glad you're trying to broaden your appeal to more than this demographic. And for those just listening, I'm making a very, very narrow little, thing. But it also doesn't mean that I'm going to go for it because the product itself is still not
Yeah.
something I would reach for. So, they still haven't solved that fundamental problem. But yeah.
Yeah. And it is a bit of a balance, isn't it? It's to make the decision to a boycott or not support a brand. It's only hard when you don't, when you actually do like the product,
Yeah, exactly.
you know. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's almost like you have to like it first, and only then
Yeah.
is the decision even, more important. And I mean, full transparency, I used to love Brewdog's beers, used to drink them regularly, and I don't even think I stopped drinking them because of all of their various things. And I haven't necessarily stopped drinking them. I just don't drink them as much. I think I actually stopped drinking them because there were other things on the market and I was more interested in like
Yeah.
novelty or, something different. Um, and when this big controversy started happening, I've got a friend who works at Brewdog, and it made me really sad because the person that everybody's targeting was the way the company was run. It actually wasn't a person. There are
Right.
people, but
Right.
it's the way a company's run, or it's the HR policies or lack thereof, or it's a lot of things. And sometimes that happens in businesses. Businesses that grow really, really, really quickly
Yeah.
face very big challenges because you need to learn how to be a business as opposed to being, a kind of small thing run in your backyard with no
Yeah.
processes and no systems. And I don't know, man. I think that there's a lot to be said for when you're growing big, get somebody in, get help for
Yeah.
how to be a business, not just a
Yeah,
junk
absolutely. And
business.
I think exactly to that point, like I have friends who've I'll be good and I won't say exactly which one, but who have worked for one of the, one of the UK breweries that has been bought by a Heineken or, that kind of thing. And, their work lives are much better now that they have real HR and things that they just didn't have before. They
Mm.
didn't hate their jobs by any means before. They liked them, but there was a lot of there were a lot of gray areas. There were things that probably should have had policies that didn't. And that's not to say that everything needs to be rigid and everything needs to be done a certain way, but now they have a lot more protection as employees that they just didn't have before. So if someone does find themselves in a long-term illness situation or something like that, they're much better off now if effectively working for Heineken than they were before. So, it cuts both ways. Like you want your small things to get bigger, to the size that they want to be, but
Mm.
you also want that to be sustainable and that, like you say, that growth needs to be supported by kind of a growth in frameworks and processes as it goes along. It
Oh,
can't just kind of career in different directions and hope it all works out, because that's just as we've seen, kind of a recipe for disaster, even if you're making good stuff. So
yeah. It's almost, for anyone out there in the dev software design world, it's like the difference between working for a startup or working for like a big multinational corp. Oh my gosh, the multinational corps have got processes coming out of their ears and training and this and
yeah.
you've got to go through, lots of bureaucratic layers there.
Yeah.
That said, there's benefits to that. And lots of
Sure.
people choose that because of the structure, the safety, the security of, a company that spends a lot of time just running itself as a company, as opposed to just trying to, make money or sell something or, get launched or get funding, whatever the case is, which is, startup vibes can be like that. It can be a bit chaotic and not very structured. Um, both have their pros and cons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, again, to go back to Brewdog, although we're not like just picking on Brewdog specifically, but I think they
No.
are emblematic of, they were one of a bunch of breweries that started about that time where, because they were kind of modeled on kind of a startup sort of model again, the goal would have been to get bought or to get other, whether it's private equity or a big brewer or something, they're one of many well, I won't say many, but I'll say a fair few that was the goal. Like it started like a, you're quoting here, normal business where you would start the business with a, having an exit strategy to get bought by either something bigger or acquired by private equity or, one of these things. So it's not, that in itself is not a crazy thing. You are starting a business. In this case, it happens to be a beer business. And at some point you want the next thing to happen. So I think there were others like that too, but you didn't necessarily get the same kind of publicity you got. Instead, that other backlash you get from beer nerds who are like, I'm never drinking them again because they've been bought by X or Y. And sometimes with good reason, because sometimes the beer, again, did go to shit, when that happened. Not always, but
Mm.
there was such a trend of that for a while. And again, those of us, terminally online beer people would have seen all of that sort of cycle repeating, sort of rinse, repeat, the same thing happens again and again. Now, I think then that question comes back into is however it started, is the sort of the founding ethos, if you like, still important after big beer or private equity or whatever has stepped in, and to what extent do they kind of maintain that identity? And and I think there's a lot more successful examples now than there used to be, but I think there is still that almost knee-jerk reaction amongst a certain, probably again, terminally online set who see something get bought, freak out, and, are never drinking it again. And then, of course, we all are. We've all been in like a Weatherspoons, like at an airport or something, where this is what's there, and everything goes out the window then. But it's still an interesting question. It's like, how relevant is all of that kind of thing? Like, has ownership ever really been relevant? Because it's such a tricky question, because even with something that is independent, family run, they've probably got investment from something, whether that's someone else in the family or bank loan, or again, these things don't just magic themselves into existence. So I think there's a certain amount of, again, kind of magical thinking, if you like, over this sort of platonic ideal of what these independent breweries might be versus the reality of running a business. So
yeah, because I think sometimes in craft beer, and this was something that a lot of the women I interviewed for my book talk about, this idea like that craft beer is art. And so we have this idea that, like, brewers are artists, craft breweries are these, spaces, and somehow we have somewhat removed them from capitalism, but they are capitalistic entities.
right.
Now, there are some breweries that are worker owned, which I love.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not saying anything about breweries that aren't, but I love the idea of worker owned institutions. But, at the end of the day, most of these breweries are capitalist enterprises that exist for profit. And I think, when we acknowledge that, we need to, why are we defining them as this sort of like other thing? I think we need to be careful when we talk about breweries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's very easy to forget because a lot of breweries have got the most magnificent marketing teams, and they spin the stories, almost too well, where you actually almost forget that. Well, at the end of the day, the story's great, but they need to make beer consistently well in the right volumes to be able to sell at the right times, and the normal things that happen with any kind of food drinks distribution sort of business is like, is it right? No, ditch it, cool. Is it enough? No, increase it, cool. Is it at the right price? Is it reaching the right
Right.
markets? This is all business, guys. And actually, when you go from being effectively a glorified home brewer to a brewery, you're not making beer anymore. You're marketing and selling beer, because the making should be the least of your worries. The marketing will tell you otherwise, because new release, and special this, special that, but that is probably 5% of most breweries' business or headspaces. Thought about what new can we do, or where can we push this boundary. It's got much more to do with consistency, reliability, supply, logistics. That's the boring side of the business, but that's the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, I think that doesn't mean there aren't good stories out there to be told, or that, we don't want that. Again, I think we have, especially here in Ireland, we have some fantastic examples where, again, I'm gonna just look at my Hope can, because I love how, they've gone in and they went to the local librarian and got some stories to put on the cans. That's fantastic, because I think that's a great example of using that local, that local area, tying it in, really kind of, you're speaking to your local customers as much as to others too. Again, Ballycavin as well, using things to do with the farm there. I think that's fantastic. But like you say, you get to that point because you're making good, consistent beer, that then you can sort of attach the story to it and get people beyond your core audience more interested through those narratives and through that kind of storytelling. And again, and that's fantastic. We love that. We want to see more of it, but it's also like, it doesn't work unless you've got those fundamentals in place. Those fundamentals started with the business plan, and you went from there, and there's got to be some kind of ROI at the end of the day, or you wouldn't be doing this for funds, unless you're just like independently wealthy, and then what are you doing? So yeah, but
That's it. If I was independently wealthy, maybe I would open up a brewery because, hopefully make great beer, but not care too much about the sales and stuff. I don't know.
you'd have
Or
a
at
little
least the profits.
philanthropic pub.
Care about
Yeah,
sales, but not profits.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, someone give us lots of money because I want to open up a bookstore that has and Tandy can be the brewer and Lisa, you can be the historian and librarian, and we can run it all
Fair.
together, and Katie can run amazing classes out of it or whatever she wants to do, but the beer ladies can open up a like pub bookstore brewery. What do we think, friends?
And make it a co-op.
Done.
And yeah,
Yeah.
Totally in.
It'll be worker owned and yeah. Everyone will. So
Oh,
someone give us money.
yeah, someone
Oh
give us money,
gosh.
please.
Yeah.
No, it is. It's actually really funny. But, Lisa, what you were saying there comes back down to kind of authenticity, which is, almost what we started with, which was,
Mm.
if you're going to make a claim, by God, actually be that person.
Yeah,
You
back it
know,
up. Yeah.
back it up, back it up. I mean, there was the case of Blue Moon, good old
Ah,
Blue
yes.
Moon, and they were in a lawsuit. Well, Coors were, because I think it was the Belgian Beer Association sued them because the Blue Moon marketing made it seem like Blue Moon was brewed in Belgium, and it didn't quite do a good enough job of saying brewed in America, Belgian style Vit, if you know what I mean. So anyway, they settled out of court on that one and had to change their packaging. But you know what? It's a lovely beer, but there's nothing wrong with authenticity and honesty. It doesn't have to be brewed in
No,
Belgium
no.
to be a great beer, even a great Belgian style beer. So why hide? Do you know why? I don't know. Why
Yeah, I
pretend?
agree with you. I think being honest really appeals to people more than anything because I
Yeah.
mean,
Mm,
people can Google things, and I know I said earlier, oh, well, the average person isn't going to Google, but someone will. You
Someone
know,
will. Yeah. Why be caught
yeah.
out?
So
Yeah.
exactly, just be honest. And what's
yeah.
wrong with Belgian style? Like, the only thing I can think of is if you're trying to like frame it as like some kind of an import or something, but like it just doesn't make sense. It's not logical.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's one thing if you're tying it into like, again, to look at like a Stella with like, a date on it where you're like, okay, no one was actually brewing this then, but okay, fine, whatever. It's part of your sort of brand history. And again, I think it's such an interesting thing now to think about how people see a lot of the things from like a brand experience perspective. Because you go to Guinness and you have a brand experience. It's not just about having the Guinness, it's you're being sort of led on this journey. You go to Carlsberg, same thing. You go have the full brand experience, and that I think is going to be like an ever kind of an ever growing thing. Even if they have other brands, other styles, like there's this sort of mothership brand that you are meant to kind of have a relationship with, and it's such an interesting thing. And again, because coming at it from the other side, like for work, like they're collecting a ton of data on you, so what are you kind of getting out of that exchange at the end of the day? Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, it just is. So it's how do you kind of I guess navigate that as a consumer? Like, are you happy knowing that these, we'll talk about the big ones now, have all this data on you, and they're trying to find the best way to figure out how to sell to you, specifically you, and it's all sort of hyper personalized, all of that kind of thing. Whereas again, your smaller folks don't have the opportunity to be doing that kind of data mining and, kind of customer journey mapping and all of those kinds of things. But well, they could do a little bit of it. But, think about how that, how that sort of has really like unleveled the playing field for sort of small v large, not even about just like the kind of money they can throw at things, but like the experiences. So how I feel like then it really puts the onus on smaller breweries to have some other compelling, and I'm air quoting here, experience. Like, what is that? It's great if they have a story or a narrative, but how are people kind of, having this relationship, if you like, with a specific brand? Because people get so invested in these things and it's tricky. So
I've always wondered
Yeah.
how brands can differentiate themselves when they don't have hundreds of years of history, or they don't have, something like a claim to fame in
yeah.
some or other way. But then you do get some examples, right? So this was in the news recently. A brewery called Mitchell's in the UK, in Lincolnshire, um, came out with not their first, but the one that took the beer Twitter's world by storm. Beers. This one was called Osama Bin Lager,
I
which
mean,
I
it's a
know
whole thing,
it's a whole thing. But the previous ones had also been King Jong Ale
I see what
and
they did there.
see
They
what you
have
did there,
form.
yeah,
They have form.
yeah,
Yeah.
Putin Porter. So what I admire about this, now you don't have to like it, you don't have to agree with it. What I like about it is that they're creating their own kind of story, their own theme, if you will. They're attacking dictators and whatnot. And look, this was highly controversial. People loved it or hated it. The website had to be shut down over people just trying to get there to like look at it and see it. And there are no official complaints as documented yet, but people sort of either really find it funny or they really think it's disrespectful. Apparently, the next beer is inspired by Donald Trump. Might be in orange color, so we'll
Oh
see.
God.
I know, I know. But now you see, it comes back down to okay, if you don't have some sort of heritage or some sort of story, what do you do to differentiate yourself? That's a way of doing it. It can be done really well or really badly. You
Yeah.
know, on the fence about that particular one, but we've had many examples over the years of people doing edgy, air
Mm.
quoted edgy branding badly, panty droppers and dirty
Yeah. Yeah.
blondes and kind of objectifying women. That takes things way too far. But are dictators fair game? I don't know. I guess it comes down
Yeah.
to the consumer and the target audience, right?
Yeah. And I guess like, are you punching up or punching down? So I think that,
There we go.
it may feel, which is it? Like I think if it's obvious, it's the same, you know it when you see it, right? So it's kind of,
Mm,
I think as long as you're not kind of glorifying these things, we can all have a bit of fun with things, and everyone's going to have a different sense of humor. So, but again, I think it's like, are you punching up or punching down? Like if you're punching down, then that's just kind of skeevy and gross, no matter what, the subject is. So,
mm, mm.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, and I'm not talking about any specific examples, but just in general, like if you're gonna make something satirical or whatever on a beer can, you cannot have a situation where you have to explain the joke. Like it has
that's
to be
a good point.
blatantly
Yeah.
obvious. And this is
100% true.
just again like nothing specific, just in general, it has to be something that is obvious to everyone.
Mm,
Or not most people,
yeah.
right? You can't put out a joke that people have to have it explained to them, because then it's not satirizing what you think it
Yeah.
doesn't work. um
Mm,
so I think it's really important that if you're going to go with something, that yeah, you have to be making sure that you're not punching down, and that you also have to make sure that whatever is happening can be easily explained on a beer can. And that's why I would think maybe don't do it because I just don't think um it's easily explained things are easily explained on a beer can. I just don't think it works most of the time. I think people just don't. I think sometimes things that people try to satirize end up becoming the thing they're satirizing. Like
Mm,
it
yeah.
mm.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Regardless of the
sometimes,
intention.
yeah, exactly. Regardless of the intention. Yeah. Even if they didn't mean it, sometimes things just go in a direction. Again, you've only got, you've only got so much real estate to play with. Think about, maybe stick to your puns, and that's
Yeah.
so
That you can have the best of intentions, but it
yeah.
just doesn't read that way, because at the end of the day, it's something that is being sold, and that adds another level to it. It's not art on a wall,
Yeah.
which can be this, interesting self-expression of certain things. But once it's something that you can purchase and own, and it adds another layer onto a product. So I think you need to be cognizant of that when you're making art or making whatever things you are in a beer can. So I think a lot of times the things people think are satire, it just does not end up working,
Mm,
regardless of your intent.
mm.
That's my
Yeah.
personal opinion. I don't. What do you both think?
Well, I think you're 100% right in that. I wouldn't trust myself to come up with something that I think is satirical, because I just don't think that that's my kind of humor, or at least I don't trust myself to come up with that sort of thing. I can see it done well and I can see it done badly. Ooh, I'd err on the side of caution. That's,
Yeah,
if it were
exactly.
me,
Like,
if it were me.
Um,
But there are so
yeah,
many
I
people
think,
that can just pull it off, and I think that's cool. Um, as long as it's done well. Um,
yeah.
and incidentally, this brewery, Mitchell's, um, has, at least with the Osama Bin Lager beer, they've donated portions of the profits to people impacted by terrorist attacks, apparently. So that's actually a nice story to tell. You don't see it on a tap medallion or on a
Right.
can, or however they're selling it. You don't get to see that. But I think that's kind of cool. So there is also an extra, if you're going to poke fun at something, or if you're going to, be a little controversial, have something to back it up. Be
Hmm.
be mindful of the balance, I would say.
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's the balance, and then I think too, to go back to the point about sort of the humor and the satire. Like, again, that's going to be so kind of regionally specific and variant, and it's just hard to have something that's going to be a universal. Oh, that's funny. Like, regardless of,
Mm,
even let's assume the best of intentions, like something that is very, very funny here, like people are going to get wildly offended about in the States, and possibly vice versa.
yeah,
It's just, why take the risk, unless that is exactly what you're trying to do, unless you're just trolling, and then again, unless you can kind of back up your trolling with some kind of, but we're giving to charity, something. Not that
mm.
that should be an immediate, like, get out of jail free card, but
No, yeah.
is there some is there some greater good coming from this? It's
Mm,
well,
hard to know.
yeah, and we have to figure out, who are we offending, because there
Yeah.
are going to be people that are offended because you put feckin on a can, like
Right.
FECKIN,
Yeah.
right? Do we, are they our consumers? Do we care that,
Right.
someone cares that I put big can of what,
Yeah.
feckin lager or something? You know what I mean? Like, that's just an example, but like, you have
Yeah.
to think about like who your target audience is as well, and like, who are we offending? Like, as long as we're not, hurting anybody or going after people, those are things to consider. Like Lisa, you said, like the US and I, like, for example, idioms and
Yeah.
language and
These things
phrases
all.
and things like that, they're different. And so,
Yeah.
you could say something and people won't understand it. It's not necessarily that they'll be offended, but they
Yeah.
just won't get it.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to consider, like, who is your audience, and is it something, are they, do you care if your fake curse word or actual curse word on a can, for example, is going to offend someone who's not someone you would purchase
Right.
your product anyway? If it's something that to most people is harmless, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's a silly thing, but someone will be offended by that.
Yeah.
yeah. And that's kind of it, as you say, knowing your audience and knowing whether you're niche and local or whether you're broad. If you're aiming to distribute to many countries or whatnot, then you might want to be as most broadly appealing as possible. If you're super niche and you're only looking to serve the locals in your town, by all means appeal to them, right?
Right.
Right.
Without being weird about it. But yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
like,
Without hurting people or being
Yeah.
harmful or, whatever. But
yes, without being
yeah.
exclusive, it's
Yeah.
absolutely fine to appeal to your niche, which, yeah,
Yeah,
I'd say that goes. So
exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, it comes down to it, right? And Lisa, you said this at the beginning, and so did you, Christina. But it's like, if you're thinking of the brand, not the beer, if you're
Mm,
thinking of the brand's image, or the brewery's image, as opposed to the beer that you want to drink again, figure out whether that's the balance you want to strike, right?
yeah.
If I were a brewery, I'd possibly want people to think of the beer first, to want the beer. That's just my opinion. But yeah, ethos can come down to a million things. It can come down to what people perceive your brand as. It can
Yeah.
come down to your actual story. It can come down to the way your staff are treated, and whether they love working there or not. It can come down to your charitable causes, your history. So many different things make up your ethos. And I guess there is no prescriptive rule here, is there? It's just like, figure out what's right for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've seen, kind of play out maybe what didn't work. Like we all lived through the era of kind of the rock star brewer, and that could sort of cover a variety of sins, if you like, but then it became its own sort of tiresome thing as well. And again, at that point, it was exactly the same thing. Are you thinking about the person who's the figurehead, or are you thinking about the beer itself? And I think when it becomes about a person, the sort of almost cult of personality versus was the beer good? Again, what's the balance there? And I think we've sort of corrected for a lot of that. I wouldn't say 100%, but I think it's better. And again, whether that figurehead is a brewer or a founder or whatever, it's great to have someone who's a spokesperson who can, again, kind of be that sort of authentic feeling person. But at the end of the day, do you want to drink the beer? Like, is it good? So I feel like it always comes back to that. At least for me, again, if you're, you know, whatever, say 19 years old here or 21 years old in the US, like you may be about like what your friends are drinking, and that's cool. You figure out what's cool for you. But I think, when you reach a certain age, it's like I want it to taste good. If I'm paying money for it and the calories and all those things, I want it to be good. But again, to go back to what we were saying before, but you also want to be sort of supporting something that is good, air quotes, for you, that kind of aligns with your, sort of is kind of how you identify, if you like. So even if it is about the beer, you're still kind of looking for, something that's sort of at least on your continuum, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And, maybe just as a summary again, I think that the one thing that we all agreed on was that it shouldn't be on the consumer to make sure that the company is, again, air quotes, good. It should be on the company. And it's part of maturing and growing up and becoming a business that you treat people right, that you do the right stuff, that you're authentic, that you're transparent, all good business practices. And I think that that's just a huge part of it. It really shouldn't come down to the consumer. That's it. Consumers do have power. So, you know, to varying degrees, but consumers do have power. So feel free to vote with your wallet if you don't agree with, a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that's going to be bigger and bigger as we go on. And I know, Tandy, you and I were at this event the other night, is the sustainability as well. And I
Mhm.
think that's probably a subject for another podcast, but I think that will become more and more important. How do the beers like, or the breweries we like, how do they, have a sustainability story? How can they help the whole industry kind of become more sustainable, smaller carbon footprint, all of these things. And again, just touching on it now because it's going to be a bigger story in the fullness of time. But is that
It will
something we
come.
need to start to track as consumers as well? Again, you hope that businesses do that for us to a certain extent, have some kind of report card or whatever it is to say what they're doing to have more sustainable business practices. But and we'll sort of put that out there as something for people to think about. And there's obviously more to come from that angle. We got to make it
Indeed.
hard for ourselves as consumers. There you go.
Oh God, I know. And actually final thought, but it sort of frustrates me a little because I actually think we have so much to think about as it is. We're all just trying to balance too many balls every single day. And it's just like, can I just not think about this? Could I just pick up the beer that I like the taste of and the price of, and maybe be interested in the label of something? Could I just do that and trust that the rest is happening? Apparently not, but I
We live
live
in
in hope.
hope. We live in
Yes,
hope.
yes. All right, friends, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, I think we'll just
Cool.
say, folks, try to be nice to people. That's hopefully it's not hard. Do your best.
Indeed. Be nice to people, support your local breweries if they align with your values, or if you like them. And yeah, we'll see you next week, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Beer Ladies podcast. Follow us on all our socials. We're wherever you are, except for Twitter. Okay. Bye, friends.